All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the college prep event by Tamil Nadu, Tamil Muslim Association of Greater Chicago, shortly known as TMAGC. This is actually the third event on college preparation that TMAGC has hosted in the last year. Today we have an experienced college counselor with us as a guest to help us answer some questions, and she has a brief presentation for us as well. Before we get to that meat of the content for today, let's hear a recitation of Quran from our young Hafil, Affan Mira Sahib. Affan is currently doing Islamic studies at Darussalam, a well-known masjid in the Chicago area. And Affan is also part of TMAGC's youth committee. Go ahead, Affan, with your recitation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. خلق الإنسان من علق. اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Read, in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot of blood. Read, your Lord is the most bountiful one who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know. وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير. And they shall say, had we but listened or used reason, we would not be among the inmates of the burning fire. أمن هو قانت آناء الليل ساجدا وقائما يحذر الآخرة ويرجو رحمة ربه قل هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب. Are those who have knowledge and those who have no knowledge alike? Truly, only those endowed with understanding will take heed. فتعالى الله الملك الحق ولا تعجل بالقرآن من قبل أن يقضى إليك وحيه وقل رب زدني علما. Exalted is God, the true King. Do not be impatient with the Quran before its revelation is completed, and say, my Lord, increase my knowledge. The pursuit of knowledge and the use of reason, based on sense observation, is made obligatory on mankind. The following traditions of the Prophet ﷺ supplement the foregoing teachings of the Quran in the following way. Seek knowledge even though it be in China. The acquisition of knowledge is compulsory for every Muslim, whether male or female. The ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. Seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. God has revealed to me, whoever walks in the pursuit of knowledge, I facilitate for him the way to heaven. The best form of worship is the pursuit of knowledge. Scholars should endeavor to spread knowledge and provide education to people who have been deprived of it. For where knowledge is hidden, it disappears. Sadaqallahul Azim. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Walaikum assalam, mashallah. Beautiful recitation. Thank you, Afan. May Allah increase your knowledge and may Allah guide all of us. With that, I would like to introduce our esteemed guest today at this event, Holly. Holly McCord Duncan is a former admission officer at a highly selective college known as a Claremont McKenna College in California. She holds a master's degree in college student development and has worked in various aspects of higher education for more than 20 years before launching her college counseling business known as Smart College Admission. Holly, please welcome to the stage. And the participants, if you are watching this event on WebEx, please ask your questions or share your comments via Slido chat. If you go to the apps portion of your WebEx in the bottom right, you will see on a computer, you will see the option to go to Slido. Please ask your question to Slido chat. If you are watching this on YouTube, please feel free to ask your question as an YouTube comment, and their question will eventually get to us. Holly, please welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with students and parents about the things that I do. And my hope is by the end of this meeting, you'll have a better understanding of some of the ins and outs of the college admission process, because American college admissions are not necessarily the easiest things to follow or understand or decipher. So I encourage you to ask all the questions you like. And my goal is to teach you a little bit, but we don't have enough time to go into tons of detail. So please feel free to visit my website for more information as well. All right, let's see if I can share is the presentation. Let's try that. Okay, are you able to see the video?
It worked. Yep.
Perfect. Always nice to know things are going to work. One other thing I did want to mention, because many of you are parents of high school or even just coming into high school students. I too am a parent, and I have a student who recently graduated high school, and I have one who's currently a junior. So I do understand the frustration of when you know what you're talking about and your student suddenly comes home and says, "Mom, did you know blah, 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 blah?" And you think to yourself, "I've only been saying that for 6 months. Why didn't you listen when I told you?" Part of working with a college counselor is that I can say things to your students that you absolutely know how to say, but given that they're teenagers, somehow it just seems to be heard from an outside source a little better. So I empathize with you. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the content of the presentation here. Here are some basic ideas of what I'd like to cover today. First, where you go is not who you'll be. This is actually the title of a book that I would encourage anyone to read. Part of the American consumer society is an idea that a brand name means something more prestigious or more valuable in higher education. And unfortunately, that's not an accurate perception. I'm sure if I asked many of you, if I had the opportunity to do a poll, you would have heard of Stanford and Harvard and MIT and all the big names, maybe 50 big names that are out there. The truth is there are more than 2,600 undergraduate four-year colleges, offering four-year degrees in the United States alone. So we only hear about a very small percentage of them in the media, which is not necessarily healthy, because I think the schools that we hear of by brand name certainly can offer some interesting things in terms of an education, but they're not a good fit for everybody. So I encourage you to think broadly. Do not associate a low admission rate with a quality education or as an indication of a quality education necessarily. It could be, but there are also some places that I can tell you that have higher admission rates, and you will be the priority. So for instance, at Stanford and Harvard and those big names, one of the things to keep in mind is those are graduate schools. They offer degrees not only to undergraduates, but to graduate students. They do lots of amazing research that's going to change the world, there's no question. But in that process, the priority may not be on the undergraduate or four-year education. The research is usually conducted in labs that are largely staffed and run by graduate students who are getting the benefit of that experience. Yes, there are spaces for undergraduates, but the kind of work they're going to do may not be what you envision. I just spotted an error in my slides, a spelling error. My apologies. Anyway, so what I would encourage you to look at there are schools that specialize in undergraduate only education. They tend to be the smaller schools, private liberal arts colleges, but you can get a phenomenal education at schools that compete with some of those big schools if you are aware of it. Also, where you go is not who you'll be. That idea is there is no golden ticket in life. What you put into something is what you will get out of it. So try not to get caught up on a brand name. Find a place where your student will walk onto campus and think, these are the people I would choose as friends because they're as curious as I am. They're interested in similar things to what I am, but not exclusively those things, because they will also challenge me. I will not be able to walk into a classroom and be the authority on anything because there are many opinions and I can learn from my peers in this environment. So there's the academic fit, there's a social fit, which is a lot of, it's difficult to decipher for many people. What is a social fit? But for instance, some schools are very collaborative in their approach to learning, and other schools are much more on the super competitive side, to the degree of, I was just talking to a dad who went to law school, for instance, at a brand name school you would recognize. And he said it got to the point where when you would go to the library to look for a book, somebody would have checked it out and hidden it specifically so that other people in the class could not study it and get a good grade because they needed to feel like they were the best in the class. That's an extreme example, but there's definitely different personalities to colleges. And one of the best ways to figure that out, online research certainly, but if you have a chance, I really think the best way you can figure out what's a good fit for your student in terms of size or focus or location or any of that kind of thing is to visit. And in the Chicago area, you have a plethora of opportunities within easy driving distance, or I know not all of you are in Chicago, but probably most of you are within easy driving distance of a variety of colleges. I would encourage you to look at a large research university. I would encourage you to look at a smaller private liberal arts college. I would encourage you to look at different sizes of colleges. And you don't even have to think you might look at Hendrix College in Arkansas and think, I would never go to Arkansas. That's not where I want to end up. And that's fine. But if you're watching a video or something on them, or you happen to be in the area and go by and take a tour, think of filling an empty bowl. The more you look at colleges, the more you can start to say, oh, the things that I gravitate toward are colleges with amazing study abroad programs, or colleges where I have access to my professors, or colleges where I'll be living on the campus. Whatever it is that becomes important to you, you can learn that even from colleges that you don't feel like you are right at home at. So the more you visit, because they all send out very pretty brochures, the more you will actually get a sense of, this is where I would feel comfortable and where I would thrive. Because even if you go to a big name school, but you don't fit in, or don't feel like you fit in, or you feel like you're constantly the last one in the class and trying to keep your head above water, that won't allow you to take advantage of all the other opportunities on campus. And those are some of the better opportunities that lead to networking and lead to future jobs. So find a place where you fit is my advice. A hard thing to accept about the American college system is it presents itself as a meritocracy. That's not exactly accurate. As much as I would like to think it is, I have students every year who have really high GPAs and perfect test scores and all kinds of other extracurricular activities, and they still aren't getting into the colleges that on paper it looks like they deserve to get into. There are a number of things going on in that scenario. And as someone who used to be an admission officer and read applications, I can tell you there is a lot happening behind the scenes that you just don't have control over. So yes, you do need to do your best, and you do need to submit grades that meet the expectations of that particular school. You need to show that you have social skills by the extracurriculars you participate in. And that can be a job, it can be volunteer work, it can be a sports team, it can be clubs and activities. There are a multitude of ways to show that you have good social skills. But what's happening behind the scenes is they get, especially at the elite colleges, they get a large number of students who all meet that criteria, who all look outstanding and really truly deserve to get in. Numerically, that's impossible because roughly 4 million high school students graduate in the United States every year. And so if you take the top 10%, there's 400,000, or even the top 1%, there's 40,000. There are not enough spaces in those top 50 colleges for 40,000 students. So students who truly deserve to get in are not going to get in. The hard part is you never know why, and it's really frustrating. But it could be the year that behind the scenes they said, gosh, we actually want to make sure that our engineering class isn't 99% men. So we want to make sure we balance that with some women. Or we're building a community. We don't want a community of clones. We want people who bring different skills and experiences so they can learn from each other. And it may be they have too many California kids, or they have an opportunity. Colleges love to say, oh, we have students from 48 states. So if you're that one student who applied from North Dakota that year, your odds may go up, which none of us have any control over. So there are things like that in the background that unfortunately you'll never know that you started out in the admit pile, but when it came down to narrowing it down because they can only admit so many, your application may have gotten discarded for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with factors you can control. So that's why it's not a meritocracy. Another reason that it is not a meritocracy is money and financial aid can factor into this decision. There are only about 30 colleges in the United States that are wealthy enough that they can provide all the financial aid they need to students. And they don't even, so they're called need blind colleges. And what that means is when I'm reading your student's application, I am only looking at the grades, the extracurriculars, the essays, the test scores. I'm not looking at whether or not your student needs financial aid to attend the college or is applying for financial aid. So I'm making a decision based mostly on merit. The vast majority of colleges don't have that privilege. They have a limited budget and they have to be conscious of it. So if it comes down to, do we admit one student who needs $50,000 because that's all we have left in our budget, or do we need to fill 5 more spaces in the class, so we need 5 students who need no more than 10,000 each? Depending on what the needs of the school are at that point, the amount of money a student is expected to need to attend that school can make a difference in the final decision. So they're need-aware schools. So what I always tell my students is, if you don't get in at a need-aware school, blame it on the money. It had nothing to do with you. You are a deserving, strong candidate, but you just don't have control over all the factors. The hard part about all of that is that people start to freak out and think, oh my gosh, my child's never going to get anywhere. That is not accurate. If you're making a good list of colleges, you're hoping to come up with, well, my students do some creative math, but I would suggest no more than 10 to 15 colleges at most. I prefer 9 to 12. I would say 3 colleges which are in what we call the reach category, meaning either they select fewer than 30% of their applicants, or your admitted student profile, your grades and profile is a little bit below what they typically admit. That's a reach school. There are some schools that are reach for absolutely anybody. The brand name schools are just a little bit of a lottery system is what it feels like. So that's what a reach school is. A target school are schools that have a wider admission rate, I'd say between 30 and 60%. And your scores or your grades and all that kind of thing are very typical of who they have admitted in the past. And that puts you right in the target range. So maybe it'll be your year and they're looking for someone like you, but it could kind of go either way. So those are target schools. Likely schools, or what my students often refer to as safety schools, are schools where your profile exceeds who they typically admit. So maybe you have fantastic test scores that exceed what that particular school, or a GPA that exceeds what that particular school typically admits, or they have a higher acceptance rate. So a great example of this is Lewis and Clark College out near Portland, Oregon. Small private liberal arts college, the acceptance rate is actually pretty high. It's in the 70s. However, it takes a 3.9 average GPA to get in. The admit rate is, just think of it as a math ratio, because that's genuinely all it is. It is a factor of how many applications do they get, how many do they accept. Now, there are some schools, like in your backyard, for some of you in your backyard, Illinois Institute of Technology, phenomenal school. But it doesn't tend to attract students who aren't interested in STEM type of programs for the most part. So their admit rate is higher, but it's because a lot of people self-select out of that. If I'm going to be a sociology major or something that they don't offer, I'm not even going to bother applying. It doesn't make that school's education any less quality. It just means people are self-selecting out of the pool to begin with, so their acceptance rate is higher. So the whole idea of an acceptance rate as a measure of quality of education is not an accurate way to go about it. I would strongly encourage you to look at, I'm not a fan of rankings for this very reason. Look at what goes into those rankings and decide, are those the things that I care about? Because you may not care about what the amount of research dollars or the number of alumni who give back or whatever the factors are. They may not be important to what you consider a quality education or a quality experience for your student. So I would encourage you to get beyond the rankings, dig a little deeper, and find a fit for your student. Finally, I will, in this part of the presentation, and I'm going to talk about financial aid next, I'm going to mention grades, extracurriculars, essays, and test scores. These are the 4 elements of most applications. And I would put them in the order of grades first. If you don't have the grades that a college feels like you can succeed at their school, they are not going to admit you. They are looking out for themselves as well. They don't want to put a student in a position where they don't feel that that student can succeed, because then the student drops out. We don't know what happens to that student. They're not looking for that. They also get measured by how many students graduate within 4 years or 6 years. So they are aware of their own reputation as well. Extracurriculars, this is something that is a little odd about American schools. The American schools are not just looking at your grades and your test scores, like as happens in many other countries. They are also oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes interested in, who are you? What kind of things do you do? Do you play on a sports team? How do you contribute to your community through volunteer work? Or maybe you've been a leader in a club, or you've been a member and you started an esports gaming at your school, or it could be any number of things. Maybe you have a job or you're helping out your family to pay the bills. Whatever those things are, anything outside the classroom that takes up your time can probably be considered an extracurricular. So if you are someone who's really, trying to think of an odd example, really into horseback riding, for instance, and you go to lots of competitions with your horse, some people would think of that as a hobby, but it is absolutely something you can put on your college application as an indication that you do more than just study. Yes, you're really smart, but you do have social skills as well. Because think of it this way, you wouldn't want your child to have a roommate who's kind of just sitting there in front of his or her computer all the time, doing nothing but studying. That would be a difficult relationship for a roommate. So they're looking for someone who won't be a nightmare roommate and will get out and be a part of a contributing member of their community. Essays are important in the college process, especially at those elite schools that get more qualified applicants than they can accept. The essays are a little challenging for most students because it's not what they typically write in high school. In high school, there's a lot of critical analysis or research and write a paper kind of thing. These essays are strictly about the student, and it's a way for the college to get to know them. So a college will say, great, we see your transcript or your self-reported grades. We're not worried about that. Looks like you have healthy extracurriculars. You'll be a part of our community. But who is this person that's coming to college? Are you the class clown? Are you the diplomat? Are you the organizer? There's so many different roles that students and people play in life. They want to figure out who you are and what you will contribute to that community. Most students find it really difficult to write about those things. First of all, they're 17, and a lot of them think, well, this is just how everybody is, not realizing that they have special skills and talents. The other thing is, it's not a brag sheet. It's not an opportunity to say, oh, I did this, and this. What we're trying to figure out is, who are you? Who's going to show up on our campus, and how are you going to be a part of our community? And to many students, it feels like they're bragging. And I will say this about this current generation: they are humble, incredibly humble, and they don't feel comfortable self-promoting in many cases, which seems ironic given social media. But when it comes to college essays, I have found the students really struggle with that idea. So part of the things that we do in the essays are kind of some warm-up activities and other ways that I can help them to kind of structure what they're going to say, so that they are comfortable presenting who they are in a way that's authentic to who they are. The final factor for most students is test scores, and this has certainly been a hot topic lately. There are some schools that are, again, requiring test scores. MIT, Dartmouth is going back to it this year. Purdue went back to it this year. Georgetown is back to test scores. And many of the schools in Florida and the South are test required. And then you have the opposite end of, for instance, all the University of California or California State University schools, which are, they won't even look at your test scores. So it does you no good just to even try and send them. They won't be considered. Most colleges are somewhere in between, what they call test optional. And this becomes a little harder to figure out, well, what do I do? What if my student isn't a good tester, or do I still need to take the test? This is a little bit about tailoring your application to each school. What I would encourage students to do, if you're a junior in high school, please consider taking the test, the SAT or the ACT this spring. And if you're happy with your score, great, you're done. If you're not happy with your score, then you have a decision to make. Am I going to apply to schools that are primarily test optional and I'm not going to worry about this? Or is it really important to me that I feel like my test score will give me an extra boost and I really want to improve that? Again, that's up to each individual, and I can't make that decision for you, but I would say it's worth trying at least once to see where you end up. Also, here's a tip: if your student took the PSAT, there's a way to go into the app that, hopefully their counselors have told them about this, but go into the College Board app and you can link your PSAT score to a free account on Khan Academy. And Khan Academy will say, oh, we're going to analyze your PSAT score, and it looks like the math section or the grammar section or whatever it is was your biggest challenge. They will custom tailor the SAT prep program that they offer to address the things that you struggled with the most. So it's a free service, and I would encourage anyone to take advantage of it if you're seriously considering the testing. When you use test scores in colleges that are test optional, the general rule of thumb is, if they're close to or above what their typical score is, and that's usually easy to find in their website, then go ahead and submit your scores. But if they're below where they typically publish, then that could actually hurt you in the process. So don't submit those test scores. Stay test optional. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. So those are the basic things I wanted to cover, but I want to also cover a little bit about financial aid, because paying for college is expensive. So the average amount of debt in America for a college degree is about $35,000. I hope that you will find other ways to avoid that. My understanding is that, well, I will say this: I think there are many ways you can avoid debt. And if that is something that's important to you, here are some tips that I'm going to go over briefly. Again, don't buy into that American consumerism. The brand name often comes with a brand name price tag, and there are better alternatives. Target schools where your child is at the top of the admitted student profile. There are colleges, like, again, Illinois Institute of Technology is they offer 200 full ride scholarships. That's extraordinary. So I would look at schools where your student is going to be someone who is kind of a catch for that school, and that school may want to give them more money in order to entice them to come. You can start applying for scholarships. I mean, I'm not sure there is a time that's too early. 8th grade, 9th grade, and on. There's a website called fastweb.com, and I will share these resources later so that they can be distributed. But fastweb.com, you fill out a profile saying kinds of things you're interested in, your activities, etc. And based on that, it will start emailing your child the possible scholarships they qualify for. So there's some require essays, some don't, some are GPA based, but many are not. Some are things like you're a twin and you're left-handed, and there's some goofy things out there. But keep in mind they are national scholarships, so they will have a fair amount of competition. Local scholarships are a much better option if you can find them. So some school, maybe your organization offers scholarships to students in your population. Less competition. There are oftentimes educational foundations in various cities that say our scholarships are restricted to just local students to apply. Your high school counselors should be able to direct you to those resources that are local. This is a great tool, collegeinsight.org. It will allow you to see so much information about a college, the average debt at graduation, the average salary 10 years out, how many students are graduating in 4 years versus 6 years, because you can't assume that you will graduate in 4 years if you can't get the classes at that large public university. And years 5 and 6 can get expensive. So look into the details of those kinds of things. State exchange programs. There are a number of states that have gotten together and kind of created coalitions where they say, if schools opt in, then even though you live in this state, our state over here, the state 2 states over, so Illinois and Indiana, for instance, or Wisconsin, they say we may still offer you a tuition discount because if you'll do that for our students, we'll do that for your students. And there are numerous organizations, or there's a Western University Exchange, there's a Midwest, I'm not going to get the name exactly right, I think it's Student Exchange, there's a Northeast version and a Southern United States version. So look for opportunities where an out-of-state college may not charge you an out-of-state price. They're almost all public universities that I have seen. So if you're looking at public schools, those are some good options. Community college transfer program. There are about 20 states in the country now that offer 2 years of free community college. And that may be a really good option to save a lot of money and then transfer into a 4-year program. The pros and cons to that. Oops, excuse me. Work college, for Pete's sake. There we go. Work College Consortium. There's a group of colleges that have said, if you attend our college, you will graduate with no debt. The way we do that is you will have a job on campus. It might be, if you have computer skills, you might be helping in the tech departments. If you tech support, if you don't have tech skills, you could be serving food in the dining hall. The jobs range all over the board, but those colleges are committed to helping students work their way through college, essentially. This is called the number 9, Jeff Salingo's buyers and sellers list. There's a new version that should come out sometime in the next month or two, is what last I heard. Buyers and sellers list is an evaluation of colleges in terms of what percentage of their students are offered merit aid. So there's need-based aid, which is basically what the free application for federal student aid says. Oh, your family can afford to pay $30,000 or whatever the amount is to go to college. The buyers and sellers list, the more elite a college is, the more they are what they call a seller college, meaning they don't need to offer any merit aid in order to attract students. So MIT and Stanford and all of those Harvard, Ivy League schools, don't count on any merit-based aid. It's really hard to come by. Buyers, on the other hand, are other schools, the vast majority of other schools who say, hey, we think you're amazing and we'd like to entice you by offering you some money. I was just talking to a student last night who is applied to a school in Ohio called Xavier College. And even though he hasn't filled out his federal aid form yet, or they haven't gotten a copy of it, they have already come down in price so much that they are competitive with the state institutions here in California. So this list will help you give you a guide as to how much aid is offered, what is the average amount it's offered, and maybe that becomes a way that you choose your colleges. Don't limit yourself geographically. The coasts are very popular in terms of students wanting to attend college. The Midwest, really is looking for more students. Not every college, it's not a universal statement, but for the most part, it's much harder to get students from the coast to go to the Midwest than it is to get everybody else to go to one of the coasts. So if you don't limit yourself geographically, you may have some really good options. No loan schools, these are, again, the roughly 30 colleges that are also need blind and don't look at how much money you need. There are colleges that have said, even if we give you a financial aid package, we guarantee that we will not include loans in that package. But those are also very hard to get into. And the final way that I would say you could possibly reduce your cost of college is to have your student take international baccalaureate exams, advanced placement exams, or do a dual enrollment program with a community college. Because what that may do is when they go to college, the college that they attend may say, oh, you've already taken, or you got a score of a 4 on AP Physics. We won't make you take physics. We'll give you credit for it. So that's a little bit of money you can save, and they may be able to graduate early. Okay, I want to leave time for questions. These are some of the summer workshops I offer. I will again send information out so that it can be distributed and you guys can look into those if you're interested. And then let's turn it over to questions.
That's great. Thank you, Holly. That's a very informational presentation. I'm surprised that there are only 30 colleges that are need blind. I didn't know that.
Yes, it's a very small number who are wealthy enough to say, we'll pay for whatever.
Boy, wouldn't that be amazing if you have that list in hundreds? By the way, how do we find what are those colleges, the need blind colleges? Is that
It's
a list available?
a simple Google search of colleges that offer no loans or need blind colleges, and it'll pull up the list. There'll be names you recognize for the most. I think there's only 1 or 2 that you probably won't recognize.
Got it. Okay, that's good to know. We have received a bunch of questions before the event. We can start with those questions. And for the viewers, just a quick reminder, if you are on WebEx, please post your questions on the Slido app. If you are on YouTube, please feel free to ask your question as a comment and it'll find its way to us. All right, the first question I would like to start is more of a follow-up to what you had presented, Holly. The question goes, how do we know the acceptance rate of the college? As a parent or student, do we need to know this for sure? What they mean is there any benefit in knowing the acceptance rate of a college before applying to a college?
I think it's actually quite important. And the reason for that is sometimes students talk about their dream school, and most of the time it's schools that they have heard of. So the way I like to present this is, imagine I walk you into a buffet that has 2,600 desserts or your favorite foods in it, and I say, pick your favorite. Chances are you will pick what is familiar to you, because it's very unlikely that you're going to randomly choose something that you've never heard of. But if I gave you a year or 2 or more to go through and taste test those things, you might come back to me and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. This is my new favorite. That's very much what the college search is like. And the admission number is it's useful to know, because if your child is applying to a school that accepts fewer than 30% of its applicants, you don't want to pin your hopes on it, because it's a little bit like a lottery system at that point, and it could be all those things happening behind the scenes that just don't go in your favor that year. So what I tell students is you want a blend of schools. You want some that admit fewer than 30%. You want probably 5-ish that admit between 30 and 60%, where your grades and profile match about what they typically admit. And then you want maybe 2 or 3 schools that fall into the category of they have a higher acceptance rate and you exceed who they typically admit. So the admit rate is important to be aware of, because I wouldn't want a student to apply to 15 colleges, but have them all be colleges that accept fewer than 20% of their students, because you just never know what direction that's going to go.
Yep, makes sense. So where do we find that information? Is it on the College Insight website that you mentioned earlier?
Collegeinsight.org will certainly have that information. If you're going to buy a college guide, I think Fisk is pretty good, and it will profile all the colleges, including their admission rate. It's on the college's website itself. The thing to be aware of in college admission rates is it can vary by major. So if you are, the three most popular majors in the country are engineering, computer science, and business. So for instance, at UCLA, the general acceptance rate is 14%, which is crazy as it is. But if you're applying as an engineering major, it's about 5%. So it can vary from major to major, and be aware of that. And that information can be much harder to find. But I would encourage you, never hesitate to pick up the phone, or my students don't pick up the phone, I pick up the phone, but they email either the admission office or an individual department within the college and say, what is your acceptance rate for your particular major? Or I'm interested in being a fill in the blank major. What has been your history of acceptance rates in that? And that can be very useful.
Got it. Thank you, Holly. By the way, they do pick up the phone to go to social media, not necessarily to call anyone.
Not to call, you're right. That's a good
Yeah.
distinction.
There is a follow-up question in regards to, you had mentioned about extracurricular activities, right? So are all extracurricular activities equal? And are there specific activities that you would suggest based on the grade where the student is at?
What I tell students and families is follow your curiosity, because honestly, even if there's someone who is an independent college counselor in New York City who charges $120,000, which is just outrageous in my opinion. But his angle is, if you work with me from freshman year, then your odds of going to an Ivy League he will tell you they are higher. He does not guarantee it, but they are higher. I think that's deceptive. I am really uncomfortable with that, because he is not in the room where decisions are made. He cannot guarantee anything. What I would tell students is, if you follow your curiosity, whether that be academically or extracurriculars, and then apply to schools where they value you for who you are. Don't try and mold yourself into this perfect candidate, because what may happen is you get to your senior year and you don't get into those dream schools that you had on your list, and you feel like, well, gosh, if I'm going to go to this other school that accepts 40% or 60% of their students, why did I work so hard? Whereas if you follow, and you'll feel cheated, honestly, is how most of my students who experience that have described it. If you're following your curiosity, you can't lose. You are learning, you are finding things interesting, you are making yourself into a more interesting person. All of those things. There was a great essay back in, it's old now, it's 2012, but an MIT admission officer wrote that they had denied a kid who had genuinely built a small nuclear reactor in his garage. Crazy. I'm glad that we're not doing that very often. But you would think of all the schools that would, I mean, most people from the outside would look at that and think, oh my gosh, he's going to get into MIT, no question. The student was not admitted. Now, he didn't explain why he wasn't admitted, but it just goes to show that you can't create yourself, you can't mold yourself like a museum piece into the perfect ideal candidate. So I would encourage students to spend their time in extracurriculars, showing what interests them, following, if you're into sports, great, play sports, but be aware that sports scholarships are not as plentiful as most people assume they are. It can help you in the admission process. If a college coach has been in touch with you and says, yes, I'm going to make sure they tell you, yes, I'm going to advocate for you, not just I'm interested in you. When it comes to actually getting in, the coach can put their finger on the scale and go over to the admission office and say, hey, I'm really this is my top choice. And that can make a difference in the process. But for the most part, as long as your extracurriculars are showing that you're doing something other than academics, something other than being a lump on a log, I value education. This is my life, but it's not what defines a life. Experience defines a life. And you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you can't communicate and share that knowledge, it's a very limited value. So I would encourage students to look at activities that show they have the ability to interact with peers, or peers are important, especially if you're a homeschool student, but peers or adults or their community, so that it shows that you will be a part of the community that you're going to.
Got it. Wonderful. Yeah, you mentioned earlier in your presentation that the colleges look at you as a persona. So yeah, it's your overall personality that matters, right? Just because you did something exceptional doesn't necessarily mean that you get admitted to a good college. Great. Some of our high schoolers haven't decided what major they're going to do in the college. So the question I've received is related to that. By what year in high school do we need to finalize what major that we are going to do in the college? This is a student, I'm guessing, that's asking the question.
Oh my gosh, this is such a great question because so many students feel like I need to know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. The truth of the matter is, students who are in high school now are going to change careers at least 5 times on average during their lifetime. There are jobs that don't exist today that some of these students are going to hold. So how do you prepare for that? How do you choose a major? I would say for the most part, there are some colleges, many colleges in fact, where you can go in as undecided. The exceptions to that are usually engineering, computer science, and business, because those are the ones that if you don't start in those majors, it can be much harder to get into them, if at all. And they're wise to the students who say, oh, I'm going to be a music major until they get to school and then say, haha, really? Now that I'm in, I'm going to go for the engineering major. They're wise to that. So if you want engineering, computer science, or business, I would say it's wise to apply under those majors. Otherwise, if a college allows you to go in undecided, you should feel free to do that. It is possible. Well, large state schools, it always seems like they're asking, what are you going to major in? And most students, even if they think they know, what happens is let's say they took a biology class in high school and thought it was really amazing and then decided, well, gosh, I like biology, I'm going to go be a doctor. And then they sit in their first college biology class or organic chemistry, which is notorious for weeding students out, and they discover, whoa, yes, I went into this thinking I was going to get to help people, and that's why I chose medicine. But the things I'm having to study are not that interesting to me, and I can't imagine doing this the rest of my life. And they change majors. Or the econ class in high school that was really boring. Maybe they're required to take an econ class in college, and all of a sudden the teacher starts talking about something there, and the students think, wait, this is what econ's about? I had no idea. This is so much more interesting than what my high school talked about. One of my favorite examples is there's a professor at one of the colleges I worked at who I think became a professor of economics because he adores soccer. He just lives and breathes soccer. He decided that his whole area of research would be on the economics of soccer, how tournaments impact the economy, local economies, just all kinds of crazy stuff. But I think it's fun when somebody can find something they really care about and turn it into a career that they enjoy. And you may not have there's so much you don't even know that take the time to question and learn and figure it out before you feel obligated to say, I'm going to be this for the rest of my life.
Great.
So don't worry
Thank
about
you,
declaring.
Holly. Okay. Good. Just a quick reminder and a note to the viewers. If you are watching on YouTube, you can ask your questions as a comment within the YouTube itself. If you are on WebEx with us right now, you can ask your question by going to the Slido app within WebEx. If you are on computer, you can find it in the bottom right of your screen. Go to Slido and there is an option to ask Q&A. So that way you can ask your question that will be passed on to Holly. All right. The next question, Holly, is what are the pros and cons of community college transfer program? This is something you mentioned in your
That's a
presentation.
great question because there are some definite, in fact, I'm just writing an article for my local paper on this. Some of the pros are things like many states now offer some free community college, and even if it's not free, it's almost certainly cheaper than attending some of the other options. So that's a plus. You can also save money by living at home. You can take time to discover what you want to do because it's not costing you very much money to take a smattering of courses. And it gives you time to figure it out. Some students honestly are not, they say the brain doesn't finish developing until age 25. And if your student, especially if your student has a learning challenge like ADD or things like that, attention deficit disorder, those things, sometimes it takes a little extra time for the brains to catch up. Or if they're one of the younger people in their class, even there's research to show that people who are born in January or early in the year versus later in the year but are in the same grade, they are just at different points in their development, and it can make an impact on testing and all kinds of crazy stuff. So community college can be a fabulous way to take some time to figure things out. A couple of things that concern me about community college is, first of all, most community colleges have a fairly low transfer rate to four-year degrees. My own community college here in town, they can tell me how many students are ready every year, go through graduation, and are what they call transfer eligible, meaning they fulfilled the requirements to transfer. What they can't tell me is, let's say that number is 400 students. They can't tell me how many of the students started that process. Were there 400 or were there 800 or were there 1,000 who came into the community college saying, I'm going to get my four-year degree or two-year degree, then transfer and get a four-year degree. Nationally, the transfer rate is pretty darn low. It's less than 20% who actually go on to complete a four-year degree. So that's one of my concerns. The other one of my concerns is that students oftentimes think, oh, I need 100 units to transfer, not understanding that it's not just any 100 units, it's a very specific number of math courses and English courses and things like that. So if you do go to the community college, I strongly encourage you to connect with an academic advisor right away and make sure that you're taking the courses that will actually count toward your transfer eligibility. Most community colleges also can't tell you what percentage of students actually do transfer and complete a degree, and does it take them 2 more years or does it take them longer than that to complete a degree? So there are lots of data that we just don't have that can be a little daunting. In my case, I have a student who my own kid, honestly, who could go to community college, but I honestly think I need him to be in an environment where it doesn't feel like a continuation of high school. I need him to learn to be a little more independent. And so I'm looking at four-year colleges for the reason of I would like him to have that four-year college experience where he's kind of that balance of challenge and support. That's actually my whole goal for any student. I would like them to be in an environment where they feel challenged enough that they have to work, but also supported so that with a safety net, so that if they get to that point where they're like, I'm just struggling with whatever class it is, the resources are there to help them succeed and people are invested in their success. And I think community colleges can actually do that pretty well sometimes.
Got it. Thank you, Holly. The next question is about scholarships. So is there an ideal time for applying for scholarship? The question is, when should we start applying for scholarships? You had mentioned could be done from 8th grade onwards and so on, but is there an ideal time for the students to start thinking about it?
High school. High school is probably good. Most students don't start thinking about scholarships until after they know where they're going to school. And that's actually really late in the game because many deadlines will have passed. So for instance, some of the you may have heard some particularly large scholarships like this Edison or Coca-Cola or some of those big companies that offer $40,000 scholarships or things like that. Those deadlines are oftentimes in the junior year of high school. So you do want to make yourself aware. And honestly, applying for scholarships could become your own full-time job. It's crazy. It's not worth it. In the grand scheme of things, the majority of students who get scholarship money, the scholarships actually come from the colleges themselves. But if you want to keep your options open and increase your odds, I would say create an account and start looking your sophomore year and get a little more intense. Junior year is just a crazy year for everybody, but it's the more you can front load your search, the better off you'll be.
Got it. So start the search sooner. Don't wait until the last moment.
And I will tell you that oftentimes students will fill out the presentation, but they'll put their parents' email in there, and mom and dad will be on the background going, okay, apply for this one, or no, my kid's in the middle of whatever, swim season. He just doesn't have the time. We're not going to do this one. Parents oftentimes end up managing that because the parents are a little more invested in the finances than the kids are.
That's true. Yeah, they're the ones going to get the impact of it, direct impact of it.
Yes, the bill.
Yeah, exactly. The next question is related to AP courses and the selection of it. What AP courses will help in getting into medical and engineering? For example, biology for medicine, and what is important for those two programs, medicine and engineering. The second part of the question is, what if the AP that I'm trying to get into is not available at my school?
That's a great question. So when you're talking about medical school specifically, the medical school doesn't care a darn bit what you took in high school. They're not the least bit interested in what you took in high school. They are really looking at your college transcript, where there is no such thing as an undergraduate pre-med major. People say, "Oh, I'm pre-med." Well, if you ask them what they're really studying, they're studying chemistry or organic chemistry or some subset of a science field, because there is no pre-med major. A pre-med advisor will tell you you need to take a variety of classes in college that meet these requirements so that you could be eligible for medical school. But the medical school acceptance rate in the United States is hovering right around 5%. It's pretty ugly. And given the shortage of doctors, I don't quite understand why we haven't fixed it, but it is what it is. So for pre-med, I would say, again, going back to that idea of follow your curiosity. If you're thinking you want to be a doctor, challenge yourself. Take those harder classes, because it's only going to get harder than that in college and med school. So get yourself comfortable with the quantity of knowledge, the difficulty of knowledge, all that kind of stuff by taking the AP classes and making sure you're really ready for what's coming at you. Say for engineering schools are pretty, well, not all of them, but I would say if you're trying to be the most prepared you can be for engineering, take as much physics as you can. You want to be through, ideally, at least through calculus by the time you finish high school. Not exclusively, but the big name schools are going to want that. You will also want to make sure that you are taking the most rigorous, the way colleges at the elite level, especially, but all colleges, the way they evaluate an application is when you apply, your high school sends a copy of what's called a school profile. You can go to your high school. Some of them put it on the web. Sometimes you have to ask your counseling office. But the high school profile will say, okay, here are the classes we offer. We offer 7 AP classes and an international baccalaureate curriculum. When a college is evaluating you, they're looking at you in the context of your high school. So you may have somebody from in the applicant pool who's taken 12 AP classes, and you're thinking, my school only offers 5, I'm at a disadvantage. You are not, because they are not going to count that against you because you didn't have access to it. Excuse me. Dual enrollment is another option where, again, it's usually a more challenging, although I'm not sure I totally believe this, but students, the perception is dual enrollment classes where you're taking community college courses while in high school and getting credit for both college and high school. The perception is that those are harder than a standard high school curriculum. I go back and forth on this, honestly. I think a lot of it depends on the teacher, but you got to take your chances. One of my favorite programs, if your high school offers it, is the International Baccalaureate. That's always an impressive program. The AP advanced placements, if you can take them, do. But on the other hand, don't take AP calculus if you struggled with geometry. It's not worth getting a poor grade like a C, D, or F. And D's and F's don't count for colleges in terms of, they don't consider that if they see a D or an F on your record, they're going to essentially think you more or less didn't pass the class. So that we're not going to count that as meeting the admission requirements. But also, C's are not F's. B's are not F's. You can have a variety of grades and it's not going to be the end of the world. It may change what colleges you are most competitive at, but take the most rigorous curriculum that's appropriate to you is the bottom line.
Got it. Thank you, Holly. The next question is related to the salary and the connection of the salary and what you graduate from. The question is, does the university that someone attends directly translate to starting salary for jobs?
You know, I get this question all the time, and I would say look at the data. The data that I have seen indicates that if you graduate from one of the elite schools, your starting salary may be on average higher, but 8 to 10 years out, it doesn't necessarily play out that way. It's not a golden ticket in life. It's by the time an employer, maybe you'll get an interview because you attended XYZ school, but when you're researching schools, it's very easy to go to their career services page and see what employers recruit there, what is their placement rate after within 6 months of graduation, what percentage of their students have jobs. You can again pick up the phone or send an email and ask your specific question. Hey, I'm interested in majoring in accounting or history or whatever it is. Tell me about your job placement and what people are doing. I think what's really important to keep in mind in terms of careers is that there are certain skills that will carry you no matter what happens in life. So you can be really good at math or really good at analytical writing or whatever it is. The communication part of that is essential. And if you can be the person who can translate between the super techie nerd person and the general public, there's a role for you in that, even if you aren't the super techie nerd person. So on collegeinsight.org, you can see the average salary 8 and 10 years after graduation. And I would encourage you to look at that.
Perfect. Thank you, Holly. A quick reminder for the viewers, you can ask your questions. If you are on YouTube, you can post your question as a comment. If you are on WebEx with us, please use the Slido app by going to the apps section of your WebEx view and click on Slido, and there you'll see a Q&A section within Slido to ask your question that way. Next question is a couple of questions actually related to extracurricular activities, which you had mentioned in your presentation as well. First question is, could you please summarize what qualifies as extracurricular activity for a student?
The easy answer to that is anything you're doing to fill your time outside the classroom besides sitting and doing nothing. So if you have a hobby of crocheting, if you do volunteer work with an organization, if you have a job, if you're caring for your siblings while your parents work, if you are in a club or activity at school or either a school sport or an out of school sport, anything that you're filling your time qualifies as an extracurricular activity.
Okay, does that, just a quick follow-up to that, does a job qualify as an extracurricular activity
Yes.
too? Okay, wonderful,
Yes.
good to know. The second part of the question, by the way, students, the students and the parents, the viewers, you're doing a great job with your questions. Please feel free to keep them coming. We only have less than an hour with Holly, so let's get the best out of this event with our guest here, Holly. So the second part of the question related to the extracurricular activities, that should a student have more than one extracurricular activity? Meaning, does the college look at the students that have more extracurricular activities favorably than a student who may have one or two extracurricular activities?
Probably, but a little bit is going to depend. So when you fill out a college application, it asks you to list your activity. And depending on the application, there can be anywhere from 10 spaces to 20 spaces that you can fill things in. You do not have to fill in every single line. The average number of lines on what's called the common application are about 6 activities. But again, think of how broadly activity that could be, the 2-week backpacking trip you went on with the Boy Scouts or whatever it is. So you can list the activity, you get about, I think it's 150 words to describe the activity, which isn't very much. Then they ask for the number of weeks per year and the number of hours per week. So if you're working as a camp counselor for a camp that only lasts a week, if you're a counselor in training, for instance, you might put down 1 week a year, 40 hours a week, and that's okay. But what I would tell students is they're looking for a variety of skills. So if you're trying to go pro soccer and you really have to live, breathe, eat soccer, that's probably all that's going to be on your application. Now, a coach is going to love that. But an admission officer might say, well, if all you do is soccer and you're not playing on our soccer team here, what else are you going to give to our community? What else are you going to bring to our community? Now, if you have volunteer work, maybe they can say, oh, great, this student goes and works in a homeless shelter once a month and does a couple hours every month or something like that. I would encourage you to have a minimum of 2 to 3 activities that show a little bit of variety.
Okay, that's a great advice. The next question is with your 2 decades of experience as a college admissions counselor, this individual wants to know what's your view on how much of importance a college degree holds nowadays compared to, say, a decade ago?
That's probably a better question for employers, to be honest. My perception is it depends on what you do with it. I think you can go out and get a degree, but if you don't do internships and get experience while you're getting that degree, it has less value when it comes to getting a job than a student who has worked a summer in their field or done a research project or something like that, something where they've tried to apply their knowledge and an employer can see the skills that it took to do that. So the value of a degree, certainly I think if you want to talk in quantifiable measures, it's really easy to see that an engineering degree is going to pay more than a teacher's degree. What I think is challenging is we don't know what the future holds. And so when I look at a college degree and let's say a history degree, which a lot of people say, well, what are you going to do with that except teach? Well, maybe, but if you don't want to be a teacher, you've learned how to do extensive research. You've learned how to do writing. Hopefully, you've learned how to communicate well. You've learned skills that can be applied to lots of different situations. And what the feedback I've gotten from employers when I speak with them is that I can teach you how to use my specific system of whatever programs we're using in our business. What I can't teach you to do is think. I don't have the time to teach you to think critically, to analyze, to communicate your knowledge. That's what I need you to learn in college so that you can apply it to the benefit of my company. So I think some employer research might be a better way to answer that than what I would say because I have a bias.
Well said, Holly. Thank you. There is another question which is kind of related to picking a major in the college. Is it possible to take a major in college with no relating classes from high school? Meaning someone had no idea what major they're getting into, and then they had the idea at the time they finished high school. Now time to pick the major. Are they limited to what they have studied in high school, or can they go ahead and do whatever they want?
Not at all. In fact, one of my favorite things to encourage students, whether they think they know their major or they don't, go to a college course catalog. They're all online these days. And so let's say you think you're interested in, pick your subject. There is a department with that major and the catalog will tell you, here are the requirements. If you want to be an English major, here are the courses that you absolutely have to take. And then these are the elective courses. Go to that section in the catalog, read those course descriptions. If you walk away thinking, that's super cool and interesting, you've probably found something that makes sense for you. But if you walk away from that reading of a catalog and think, I do not look forward to taking those classes at all, find something else. Browse through that catalog, read the course description, see what jumps out at you. And just because it's called film studies at one college doesn't mean that it's going to be called that at another college. So take time to look through the table of contents. It's not a consistent system of calling everything by what there is no consistent names of majors. It's really frustrating. But browse through the catalog and just get a sense of what interests you. You might get to college. Most students, I would say more than half of students who go to college thinking they know what they want to major in will change their major. So totally fine to be completely unaware of what else is out there.
Good. They don't have to stress out as a high schooler not knowing their major.
Not at all.
Good to know. Good to know. By the way, viewers, one more reminder, if you are on YouTube, please ask your question as a comment. If you are on WebEx with us, please ask your question through the Slido Q&A so we can address your questions. Next questions is related to the SAT exam. Do colleges have their own entrance test and decide students, or do they just go off of SAT or ACT?
Colleges do not have their own entrance exams. There was talk of going that direction for a while, but everybody I know is the UCs were kind of the big, oh, we're going to come up with our own exam, and they never did. And they've since announced that nope, they don't plan to do that. It's too much work for them. So it's really the SAT or the ACT that if you want to do standardized testing, that would be the direction you go. The colleges,
Okay.
once you get there, they may say, we're going to give you a placement exam to see what level of foreign language or what level of math you should be taking. But that's once you're admitted and enrolled in the college.
Got it. Even Ivy Leagues don't have their own entrance test, right? Got
Nope.
it. Okay.
By the way, the
Wonderful.
only reason that the Ivy Leagues exist is because they were some of the early colleges that got together and said, hey, we need sports. We need to play against somebody in sports. So they got 7 colleges together and called themselves the Ivy Leagues. That's the only reason they're called the Ivy League.
There you go. Thank you. Thanks for the history. The next question is a specific question related to getting into Stanford. What are the requirements to get into Stanford?
So this applies to any elite colleges. There are what they list as their requirements, which are kind of standard stuff. 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 3, preferably 4 years of foreign language. Basically take the most rigorous curriculum you can handle. That's the requirements to get into Stanford. That makes you eligible. That does not get you past any point, anything else. All it does is make you eligible and put you in the pool of other eligible people. From there, who knows what will happen. Stanford, I think one of the things that we're starting to get data on, but is not available everywhere, is when a school says they are test optional, like Stanford says they are test optional. My question would be, okay, so you're test optional, but what percentage of the students are actually submitting scores? And do those students get in at a higher rate than students who don't submit scores? The data is still trickling in, but from what I'm seeing of Stanford, they do have a higher percentage of students who are submitting scores. It's unclear whether or not that translates directly to a better chance of admission, because there's no way to determine that. Because it makes sense that if you're applying to Stanford, you're probably a superstar to begin with, and you look really good on paper. Otherwise, you probably don't waste your time filling out their additional 8 questions worth of essays.
Got it. I think your earlier advice still holds good. If you're applying to Stanford, also apply to another probably private school and another local state flag school, something like that. So you have a variety of options.
It's a lot. Somebody called them lottery schools, and I think that's a really good. I mean, Stanford's admitting what, 4% these days? 4 out of every 100? That's crazy. You can, especially when some of those who are admitted have extra hooks, like Stanford is a Division I school. They give athletics definite consideration. So some of those 4% have better odds than the other 4% because the coaches are recruiting and advocating for them.
Yep, very true. The next question is related to the financial aspect of college. Some colleges give full ride for undergrad degree. On what basis do they choose those students? Is it based on GPA or SAT or PSAT? And can you explain why merit-based and explain the merit-based and need-based scholarship?
Okay, so there's a lot of parts to that question. Let me
Yep.
start with the basics of financial aid. There are 2 primary forms that you would need to fill out to qualify for any financial aid at most colleges. The first and the most ubiquitous is the free application for federal student aid. This typically comes out about October 1st of senior year, and you fill it out and go on your merry way. This year they revised it, and it's just been a nightmare for these poor current seniors who the government when they designed the form got the formula wrong. It was not giving people the amount of money they were expecting. They've changed some of the rules. It's just,
I heard
if you're
about it.
not
It sounds like a mess.
it's been just a nightmare, and it's really going to mess up the application process or the award process. But anyway, In a normal year, you would fill out the free application for federal student aid. And if it goes according to plan, it's gotten much easier and it shouldn't take you more than half an hour. If you are applying, there's a group of about oops, don't know where my screen just went. If you're applying to about 300 colleges that are usually more in the elite brand, then you are probably also looking at filling out what's called the CSS profile. This is a form, well, I think the best analogy someone that I've read is the FAFSA is like an optometrist exam. They go in, you maybe get your eyes dilated, but oftentimes not even that. It's pretty straightforward. By contrast, the CSS profile is like a financial colonoscopy. They go into every nook and cranny and they want to know every bit of your finances before they'll decide how much money they're going to give you. So that's the basics of how that works. Each college the elite colleges that take the CSS profile get to make their own decision on how they use the data. The FAFSA has federal rules, like they won't consider your retirement accounts as fair game to pay for college. They won't consider the value of your primary home. They will consider rental properties, but not the value of your primary home. The CSS profile schools, it's whatever they decide to do. So it can come back as very different. So that's the need-based aid is the difference between what the FAFSA form says, the cost of the college minus what the FAFSA form estimates your family can pay. That's what your need-based aid comes down to. Merit-based aid is any other kind of money you get. So if they're not giving you money because you need it, but they're giving you money because you play an instrument or because you were a Boy Scout or whatever the criteria is, that is all merit-based aid. Some colleges offer it, some colleges don't. As I mentioned earlier, the more elite colleges rarely offer it because basically they don't need to attract people. They get more than enough people to fill their class multiple times over, so they don't need to entice anybody. The other colleges who are not in that elite league would really like to have those students and are willing to pay for it to some degree. And that is what merit-based aid does. Each school runs their own criteria for merit-based aid. Sometimes you're automatically considered when you fill out the application. Sometimes it takes an additional essay or additional application, or you have to turn it in by an earlier deadline. So the hard part is there is no universal answer to how do you apply. It really varies from school to school. I feel like I missed part of the question. Was there more to?
Well, yeah, one of the parts of the question is on what basis do those schools select the students? Is it based on GPA or is it based on the entrance test?
It's oftentimes a combination of factors. So it can be, but it's not even always purely academic. Sometimes it's your GPA and your test score, but especially now that so many schools are test optional, sometimes it's GPA alone. Sometimes it's your GPA plus how much community. So if it's a school that values service to the community, they may be looking for the top community service students in their applicant pool and inviting them to apply. Or maybe their applicant criteria is low-income students who have done extraordinary things. Or each school gets to decide their own criteria as to, usually they'll publish the minimum criteria, like if you have this GPA, you'll get this amount of money. Or sometimes they'll say you have to have this GPA to even qualify for our scholarship. But there is no universal answer, unfortunately.
Got it. And while we are at the financial topic, there is another question related to the student fees. The question is, how is the student fee determined? Is it determined for a particular student? I understand students' eligibilities like grades, test scores, and extracurricular activities do matter. How much does the financial situation of the student impact? So basically, two-part questions. How is the fee determined? Is it determined per student? And how much of the financial situation of the student impacts in that determination?
So by the fee, do we mean the tuition, the cost of the college?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
That's what.
So each college gets to determine their own fee, their own cost of attendance. And sometimes you have like a state school there'll be a board of regents who says this is how much it's going to cost to attend a state school in our state. But each school has some say in that. So whatever is published on their website, they're required. Oh, actually, I haven't talked about net calculator. Let me quick mention this because this may be really helpful to parents who are trying to figure this stuff out. Every college that gets money from the federal government, which is the vast majority, I think I can only think of one college that doesn't, whether it be research money or financial aid money or anything else, they're required to have what's called a net price calculator. What this does is if you go to the financial, you can just Google it, net price calculator, Pomona College, or whatever college you're interested in. It will ask you some basic questions about your finances, about your specific situation, and then it will give you a number that says, based on this information, we guesstimate, they won't guarantee, but we guesstimate that this is how much you would pay to attend our college. Now, you may think, great, I'll do one of those and I'll have a ballpark figure. No. Because each college has the right to determine how much merit aid you get, how much need-based aid you get, etc., that can vary wildly from college to college. So it might give you a ballpark figure for that particular kind of college, but if you were to compare Pomona College, which is a need-blind school, to Grinnell's also need-blind. Rutgers, you would find vastly different calculations, just hugely different calculations. So you really need to do it case by case once you have a sense of what your student is interested in applying to. So that's the net price calculator, and I think it's one of the best tools out there. It's usually accurate. My experience has been it's accurate within $2,000 to $3,000 either way. So that I hope that helps somebody. In terms of, I'm losing my track of thought. What was the second part of the question?
The second part is how much does the financial situation of the student impact in terms of what their fee ends up being?
So the fee is going to be standard. You can look on their website and you can see room, board, tuition fees, etc. is always going to be what I call the sticker price. Most families do not pay the full sticker price. Depending on your financial situation and the cost of the school, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get either some need-based aid or, depending on the college, merit-based aid. So again, use that net price calculator. If the net price calculator is not asking for a GPA or a test score, it probably means either they don't offer merit aid or they're not factoring merit aid into this estimate. So for instance, University of Puget Sound out near Tacoma, Washington, they will ask what your student's GPA is. If your student has a 3.6 GPA or above, in the past anyway, they have said, great, we're going to offer you $23,000 off the cost of college to attend here. So the fees are standard, but how much it will cost each individual student varies, and how much that factors into the decision whether or not to be admitted varies from college to college, because if you're one of the top students, you're fine. But if you're kind of toward the bottom, the borderline of, gosh, are we going to admit the student or cut the student? Your grades are right on the border. Your test scores, if you submitted them, are you're maybe a little bit low, then I would say you're less likely to be offered additional merit aid because they're looking for students who are going to help their numbers, not take their average down. Is that a fair answer to the question?
I think so, yes. I think that answers the question. Thank you. The next question is related to, oh, by the way, viewers, we only have about 35 minutes more with Holly. So this is probably your last opportunity. If you have any more questions, please go ahead and ask your questions as a YouTube comment or a WebEx Slido Q&A. The next question goes regarding getting concurrent degrees, 2 degrees at the same time. So what's your insight on getting 2 degrees? Does it cost more or give the student an advantage? There is one more part, but I'll hold on to that and let
Thank
you
you.
answer.
You figured out that I had multiple part questions I need to
No, that's okay.
There are combined degrees. For instance, if you were to get an engineering degree from a liberal arts college, oftentimes you end up with 2 degrees in 5 years, where you do 3 years at the undergraduate level and then 2 years doing a graduate program, sometimes at an entirely different school. So you come out sometimes with 2 bachelor's degrees, sometimes with a bachelor's and a master's degree. It varies from school to school. I have a friend whose son is at Purdue Engineering, and he's finishing up his 4th year of Purdue Engineering, has applied for the master's program. And if he gets into that, it's an additional year of schooling to get a master's degree at Purdue. So their programs exist. There's medical programs that do similar things, but it's super hard to get into those. What I would tell students is, can it add value? Yes. Does it necessarily add as much value as the cost of the degree? That I don't know. What I would say is going to add value to you is, what have you done with the knowledge that you have acquired? So if, let's say my friend had gone through 4 years of Purdue but never gotten an internship in engineering and has this master's degree, if I'm an employer, I'm looking at that, and maybe I'm comparing him to a student who also went to Purdue but did 2 or 3 internships while he or she was a student there and did not get a master's degree. I think that's going to come down to the employer, but I can absolutely see an employer who says, look, this kid's who's done the internships has hands-on experience. I'm looking for somebody who had that experience. Whereas another employer might say, oh, we value the education more than the experience. We'll give them the experience with our company. So I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule. I would say do both. If you have the opportunity to do internships, make sure it's a fabulous way to make sure that you know what you're getting into, because I have this happen all the time with medical and law students where they say, oh, I want to be a lawyer. And then they start doing the coursework and realize this is not what a lawyer looks like on television. This is not that interesting to me. So an internship can teach you both, yes, this is what I really want to do, but it can also teach you, wow, I'm really glad I did that, because now I still have time to change direction and find the area that I'm really interested in. So I don't know that I wish I had a one clear answer to that question of a 5-year program. I'm a fan of education, so it's hard for me to say no to more education, but realistically, I think it's going to vary how much it helps you.
Okay, so
But
do you
it's
think
easier.
it'll cost more if someone does 2 degrees?
Yes, usually it does. Usually it does. But it might cost a little bit more to do a 5th year, then it might cost less to do it that way than if you were to, say, get your undergraduate degree, go into the workforce for a couple years, and then come back and have to do a 2-year master's degree. That might cost you more in the long run. Now, maybe you get lucky and find an employer who's also willing to help you pay for that. There are just so many variables that it's hard to predict.
Got it. So the
I will
other part
say,
of the, sorry,
can I add one
go
more
ahead.
quick thing? I will say that if you've done the internships and still want to get your master's degree, it's probably easier to do it while you're young and not responsible for anybody else in your life than it is to later maybe get married, have children, and then try and go back to school.
Yep, some of us know how that goes. So the other part of the question is that should the second degree be right after the first one, or would you suggest you to do it later?
Oh, this is a good question. Somewhat it depends on the student. I think, so for myself, I did an undergraduate degree, took a break, and went back and got my graduate degree. Honestly, I appreciated the graduate school experience so much more because I had taken a break. I think if I had gone from school, straight kindergarten through college through graduate school, I still would have been working for, I guess the difference is, when I got to graduate school, I was working less for the grade and more for the knowledge. Whereas when you go straight through, it's hard to appreciate that an A is a grade, but it doesn't necessarily represent, did you absorb what's important, and did you learn as much as were you doing it for the right reasons rather than just check the box and get an A? So I don't know. I think it could go, if you have a reason, if you're worried that you're going to lose steam and give up, power through it, go for it. But if what you want to do is get out there and explore and feel like maybe I want to make a little money before I go back for round 2, I don't think there's a wrong answer there.
Yeah, some programs actually prefer individuals with some experience. Harvard MBA, for example,
Yeah.
I heard
And
it prefers someone with experience.
most MBA programs prefer that you go out and get some experience before you come back. Medical school is harder, and most people who get accepted to medical school are now, they've been out of college for at least 2 years, and what they've been doing during those 2 years are probably not the most exciting things, but they're related to the medical field, and it makes them more appealing and more interesting to a medical school.
Got it. Thanks, Kali. The next question is related to admission to Ivy League schools. What is the minimum SAT score to be eligible for an admission into Ivy League colleges?
If you ask them, they'll say there is no minimum, but I would say if you look at their typical score, they're running 1,500 and above out of 1,600. So if you don't have a score that's 1,500 or above and they're test optional, I would not submit it.
Got it. That gives an idea.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Some of our students, high schoolers, are taking on the non-traditional path, meaning they are homeschooled and doing a religious program on the side and such. So what are your advices for students who studies at a non-traditional school, who plans to take GED? Is GED test harder than the regular school test?
No, the GED test will not be harder. I think if you're a homeschool student, there are a couple things that you should do. Number one, I would honestly reach out to a couple of colleges and say, what are your requirements for homeschool students? Because they will vary. At some colleges, they will say, if you are a homeschool student, we definitely want you to take a standardized test. We need a better sense of, if mom is handing out the grades and you have a straight A transcript, it doesn't look as credible as students who are being graded by an outside source. Now, to be fair, I once had a grandmother who gave her kid a C because she said he could do better, and I thought it was hysterical when I was reading the application, but that rarely happens. There's online schools. It would be nice if many of the online schools, for instance, are affiliated with a larger consortium. So there's a central school, so to speak, that is keeping track of the transcripts and the grades, and it's not the parents who are doing all of the educating. In a homeschool situation where mom or dad is the teacher, I think you really need to reach out to colleges early on in the game and say, I'm doing a homeschool situation. What are your expectations? They may say, we require an interview for homeschool students, or we require these test scores. They may say, we want to see a copy of the syllabus for each class that you're taking so that we have a sense of what the content you've been studying. They will probably ask you to write an essay on why homeschooling, what made you choose that path. So there are oftentimes extra requirements that it would be nice to know of a couple by your sophomore year versus your senior year when you're applying.
Got it. For the benefit of audience, I'm not sure if everyone knows what a GED is. Could you clarify what GED is?
It's essentially the equivalent of a high school diploma. So if it could be taken for many reasons. Sometimes students drop out of high school for one reason or another, and adults later go back and say, gosh, I wish I had finished my high school education. And they'll take this exam that essentially says, if you pass this exam, you are qualified and you have the equivalent knowledge of a high school student. Excuse me. Occasionally, I have a student who says, I am completely bored with high school. This is not my thing at all. I want to be done with it. I'm 16. I can take the exam and then I'm going to apply to college early. It complicates things in terms of planning for college and getting admitted to college, because colleges get a little wary of taking kids who are quite that young, just because of there's a social maturity that needs to go along with that. But it's possible. And honestly, in those cases, I oftentimes tell my students who are thinking of doing that many of the community colleges offer, it's called different things in different places, but what I think they call it middle college here. And you're not enrolled in a traditional high school. You're taking classes at the community college, but you're with a cohort of students who are in that same position, and there's some special advising that happens because you are still technically high school students. So if you're bored with high school but want to try out college, check with your local community college to see if they offer that kind of bridge program.
Thanks, Alvi. The next question is more of a confirmation. You had earlier talked about the extracurricular activities. So will volunteering or doing some community outreach, would that be considered as extracurricular activity, and it will help in the college admission process in that regard?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Volunteer work shows that you see a world outside yourself, that you are willing to contribute. And I think religious organizations often do a better job of this, honestly, of getting their students in their community to contribute back in some way, and whether it be to their own community or to contribute outside of their own community doesn't really matter. What matters is, are you doing something that benefits other people, not just yourself all the time? Now you can talk about, actually, I really love doing this because it makes me feel so good to know that I'm helping somebody. That's great. But you're doing it with benefits to somebody other than yourself as well. So community service is a fantastic, definitely worth doing. A lot of schools these days require, public high schools at least, maybe even private, now that I think of it, they require a certain number of hours of community service in order to graduate. Here in California, I think it's a minimum of 60.
I didn't know that. Good to know. Okay. What are the restrictions for non-US citizens in getting into medicine, particularly?
That's really interesting. If you are a non-US citizen but attending US colleges and you have permission to work in the United States, it's pretty straightforward. I don't think anybody's going to give you any kind of grief over it. I think it gets a little bit more challenging when, let's say, you attend American colleges but you don't have permission to work in the United States, and then the employer has to get special permission. Now, if you were to be a doctor, there's such a shortage that most hospitals these days will work with you in that regard, and because they need you, they need doctors. But there are no guarantees. Doctors and nurses are certainly in high demand, and there is a shortage, and most employers will, we are importing doctors and nurses from other countries as it is. So I wouldn't think that's going to be a big deal. The biggest obstacle happens for most international candidates when they have not done their schooling in the US. The United States, the only other out-of-country medical schools they recognize are Canadian, and those are even harder to get into than American schools these days, medical schools specifically. So if you do your training to be a doctor in another country and then try and come into the United States, those are different requirements and oftentimes require additional training, even though my impression is that many of the doctors who come here are absolutely qualified, but America's snobby and says, well, but we want you to be trained our way. And so the poor people end up doing a lot of repetitive work if they can't find a way around it.
Right. That's very true for medicine, particularly. The next question is more about the bachelor's and master's. Is it possible to do master's and bachelor's in two different areas, such as engineering and computer science? If so, what are the advantages and disadvantages?
Well, the advantages are the more skills you have to present to an employer, probably the more appealing, the greater your audience of getting hired. If you do choose to do two different degrees, it's not uncommon. I think you would need to explain why you wanted to make such a transition, but there are many professions where the two make sense together. So computer science and engineering, to me, makes sense that they go together. You have the skills of an engineer, or maybe you want to then develop a software expertise. Or I think of a master's degree as developing a bit more of an expertise in a subject matter than an undergraduate degree. So in that case, I think you can certainly, but you can change directions entirely. You can be an English major or a humanities major of some sort and later decide, I really want my MBA. that's totally fine. The only thing you need to be aware of is if they require certain particular classes that you didn't take as an undergraduate, you may have to go back and pick up a class or two to meet the minimum requirements of whatever the master's program is that is in a different field.
Got it. And you mentioned about dual enrollment. I think answering one of the questions. This specific question is about how to enroll for college courses while the student is at high school. Could you talk more about it? Tell more about it.
Sure. Most high schools, you speak directly to your counselor, and there's a special relationship that the school district and the community college have established. So you usually need permissions from your high school counselor that yes, you are doing reasonably well in your classes, and that they are aware you are doing this, and then it will usually, if you go through the school, it will usually show up on both a high school transcript and as a college course on a college transcript through the community college. But once you have permission from your high school, most high schools have a pretty laid out process of, okay, so you fill out this application, you register for this course that we agreed you're going to take, and then you start attending courses. It's usually fairly straightforward. You can also do this over the summer. So if you, let's say you're interested in engineering and you're not quite up to taking calculus yet, but you feel like that's really important to be more appealing to colleges your senior year, you might say, well, the summer between my junior and senior year, I'm going to take that pre-calculus course at the community college so that I'm ready to take calculus once I hit my senior year. Or you could think, well, gosh, I want to get my last English. Or my foreign language is a great example. I am ready to be done with foreign language, but I want to apply to some super elite colleges. The more foreign language I have, the more competitive I will be. I'm going to use my summer to do an intensive language class at the community college because then I don't have to take it my senior year. So there are a number of different ways you can strategize to use the dual enrollment option, either to take some things off the way and open up more space in your schedule, or explore new opportunities. Maybe you are interested in physical therapy, but your high school doesn't offer any kinesiology course and your community college does. Maybe that's a way that you explore your curiosity.
Sounds good. Next question is a much of a broader question. Are there things that needs to be done to prepare the students when they enter their high school so that they can be successful in getting into the college?
Oh, if I could design this. What I would say is, oh gosh, there's so many pieces to this. If you are at a public high school, there's a pretty good chance that your counselor at your public high school has 300 to 500 kids that they're trying to advise. It's really imagine being in that situation, and you have kids who are maybe in really rotten home situations and unsafe in their homes, all the way to kids who are thinking of applying to some high-end colleges. You've got the whole range. Make the time, just even 15 minutes, drop by and try and get to know your counselor a little bit your freshman year. Let them know who you are. Let them just kind of be friendly, right? You're establishing a relationship because eventually this counselor may need to write you a letter of recommendation as part of your application. So for freshmen, I would say establish that relationship early. Now, in my local high school, it's by letter of the alphabet, and 2 of the 4 years we've been there, our counselor has changed, and we flip-flop back and forth. So sometimes that happens, but just make the effort to get to know your counselor a little bit. So that's one thing I would say. If you're a first-year student in high school, learn good study habits. And unfortunately, I feel like we don't ever teach people how to study. We kind of assume they'll absorb it and figure it out. And most students, what they end up doing is they think a highlighter and rereading something over and over and over is an efficient way to study, and it's really not at all. There's what's the name of the book? it's escaping me. I'll look it up and I'll include it in the resources. Well, that's going to drive me crazy. But there is a great book that talks about the science behind studying, and not just what we all think is the right way to do things, but the way that science has shown our brains actually learn most effectively. And I wish more students knew that, to be honest. I wish I had known that when I was in school, because I probably could have said it takes a little bit of it takes more effort to learn this particular method, but once you learn it and you make that upfront investment, it really makes you a more efficient learner for the rest of your high school and college years. So I will find the name of that book, and undoubtedly it's going to pop into my brain the minute I hang up. But I will include that in the resources that I share.
Sounds good. Not a problem at all.
So that's what I would do with freshmen, is make sure they have good study habits and learn how to ask for help. Teach your students that failure is not the end of the world. Prioritize mental health over everything, because sometimes, and students do this to themselves, I see it all the time, they put such pressure on themselves, and some of them get to the point of, I won't try something new if I'm not 100% certain I can do it, because the fear of failure is huge. And unfortunately, we don't do a good job of communicating the way we learn. Some of the most effective lessons come through best efforts that don't pay off the way we expect them to. But you can walk away with huge knowledge, including the fact that it's okay to fail and get up and try something else or try again. That resilience is really critical. So if your student is afraid to tell you that they got a bad grade, or if you're only talking about getting into the Harvards and Stanfords of this world, and your student doesn't get in and they're going to feel like they've disappointed you to no end, think about that. Think about the impact that has on a student. Talk about the aspects of an education that happen outside of a classroom and learning to grow from those as well. Because it's very easy as a high school student to think all the learning happens in the classroom, when truthfully, some learning happens in the classroom. And maybe the stuff that we measure happens in the classroom, but the life lessons are oftentimes what happens outside the classroom, in those extracurriculars, at home, in your mosque, wherever it is. Life happens well. Grades are not the sum of who you are.
Got it. Great advice, Ali. This is a specific question from a parent whose student has missed 2 years of high school because of religious studies. So would you recommend that student to go straight to 11th grade and catch up with the missed courses, or is there any other option that this individual can do?
I think, to me, this is one of those opportunities to look into that middle college experience that I was talking about before, where I guess part of it depends a little bit on the student and what they're socially ready for. And it may be difficult to jump into. I think your public high school is required to help you do this. There's free access to public education. It's a federal law. They have to integrate you somehow. What it may mean, though, is that your student, because they've been out of the traditional school system, is not going to be, they may be old enough to be in 11th grade, but not have the academic background to perform successfully at a standard 11th grade curriculum. So I think what I would do, I think that's a great opportunity to sit down with your school and say, this is where we are. What do you think? And taking into account the student's maturity, because some students are going to be really unhappy about being a 16 or 17-year-old in a class with 14 and 15-year-olds, and they're going to feel out of place and uncomfortable and awkward socially. Other students, if they're confident, are going to be like, I don't care. I was doing my thing and this is the way it is. But there may be other options, like many districts offer alternative high school or opportunities to do some home study, or there may be remedial programs so they could catch up and be where they need to be. But I think that's a very individual conversation with the school itself and what the needs of the students are, the individual student is.
Okay, would GED be an option for the student given their situation?
They could probably do a GED. They would need to look into their practice tests for the GED, so they could probably do reasonably well and pass the GED. What will be difficult for colleges in that case is to feel confident that the student has a base knowledge that they can build on in the same way as other students. So the GED may say, yes, I can do high school level work, but I would encourage that student to supplement that a little bit with maybe an online college or an in-person college class at the local community college, or do something to boost the confidence of the college that this student is really ready for the college level work.
Got it. Thanks, Holly. We only have about 10 more minutes, so let's try to fit in as many questions as possible. I don't think we are going to answer all the remaining questions, but Holly, if you're open to it, I could probably send the ones that are not answered to you and get your answers in writing if that's okay with
Sure.
you.
Happy to do that.
But thank you very much. The next question is specifically about saving money for college for the student. So how much money would you suggest saving for engineering and medical courses?
Oh, that's a number that could be anywhere. So a large amount of it comes from how much money your family has. Then there's the cost of the actual school that you attend. So if you were attending University of Southern California engineering and getting absolutely zero financial aid, you need $90,000 per year to cover that cost. If you are attending Southern Florida University as an in-state student in engineering, you need about $18,000 a year to cover that cost, assuming no financial aid in those situations. So the range is tremendous. Say for medical school, people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on medical school. So if you're just starting to save now in high school, you would have to have an extraordinarily high salary. And if you do, more power to you, but you're probably not going to get any financial aid because of it. So it's such an individual. Those net price calculators to help you calculate the cost of colleges would be useful. But in terms of how much to save, I don't know that I can give you a flat number. Most call a financial aid office. I mean, right now that a lot of them are twiddling their thumbs, frustrated they can't get their hands on the FAFSA information. So you may send them an email saying, if my student is interested in attending medical school at some point, is there an ideal number? The hard part is if you can afford to pay for your child's education at full sticker price, you may have a better chance of getting your kid into that college, which is unfair, but it's the way it is. And that amount of money is just not what most American families have. So I would say save what you can, because they're going to ask you to pay more than you're comfortable with in most cases.
Yeah, this is unfortunately not the question that there is a straightforward or one answer to the question. So.
No. But almost every parent I know who's filled out a FAFSA form and gets their student aid report, I always say, be sitting down when you open that, because chances are it's going to give you a number that you're going to look at and think, what the heck? Who thinks I can afford that amount of money to send one kid to college for one single year, let alone if you have more than one student in college? That's just crazy.
Exactly. You might even wonder, is that a phone number that we are looking at? Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Crazy.
Can Americans, the next question is, can American online school kids, can they go to reputed universities?
Sure. So I have a student, for instance, who was a freshman when the pandemic started, a freshman in high school. And so he was online. He didn't like his online school experience through his local high school. So he switched to, even though he's not a member of the Mormon community, he attended online school through Brigham Young University Online, which offers AP courses, and you don't have to be a member of their church. You don't have to have any religious aspect to it, but they're a well-respected online school. he did fine in the college admission process. In fact, he ended up going to a school, Wheaton College, not far from where all of you are, I think, that he got a presidential scholarship for it. He did really well for himself. So students who do their education online, I don't think there's a problem with that. I would, again, in some ways, treat it like a homeschool situation. Speak to individual colleges and make sure that they don't have special requirements like, okay, we really want to make sure you have extracurriculars that show that you can interact with people, or we really want to have an interview to assess your social skills, or we really need a test score or something like that. But online school is becoming more common. It's ideal if it's an accredited online school where, so Laurel Springs or BYU, or there are many out there. It just adds an extra level of reassurance to a college.
Got it. Thanks, Kali. We only have 4 more minutes before the time that we have advertised as the end of the time for the program. So would you like to conclude, say anything in the way of concluding the event?
I would encourage all students, if you're listening, to please, again, don't worry about the name of the college. What you put into college is what you will get out of the experience. Go to a place where they value you for who you are, not because of who you pretend to be in order to fit in there. There's some fantastic, if any of you have Amazon Prime, there's a fantastic show that's on the Amazon Prime video section. It is called The College Tour. You can also get it online, thecollegetour.com. There are 11 seasons of it, and it's a fantastic way to start taste testing the college experience, because most of the colleges on there you probably won't have heard of, but there are some fantastic things that you can learn about them that you can say, well, gosh, I'm not interested in going to college in California. I'd like to be closer to home, but where can I find a college that closer to me that talks about these kinds of things? Because that sounded really cool. Or it's just, again, that taste testing or window shopping idea. The other thing I would recommend is there's a list of colleges called Colleges That Change Lives. It's about 40 schools. A couple of them you probably have heard of, but not necessarily. They're colleges that have a specific mission to support undergraduate education. Undergraduates are the priority, and it's not only those 40 schools, but they just happen to have created their own coalition. There are lots of different kinds of coalitions. So if you have a student who's interested in environmental issues, there's a consortium of environmental colleges that may be particularly well suited to your student. Don't let somebody else tell you what a good education is. Define it for yourself so that you feel like when you graduate, you got what you needed out of it to be successful.
That's a great advice. Thank you, Holly. That's a great advice. Before we conclude, I would like to thank the viewers for your engagement. Those are great questions that you have submitted before the event and during the event. These are all great questions, and I would say some of them are burning questions for parents like myself who are first-generation immigrants in the country and not necessarily have gone through the college admission process ourselves. So it's really helpful to hear the input from Holly as an experienced counselor. So what we're going to do next is I'll send the questions, the compiled ones that are not answered yet to Holly and get her response and then share it to the group. And also we will Holly's presentation with the group as well, which has Holly's contact information. If you're interested in having a conversation with Holly, you can go ahead and reach out to her using the contact information. If you have any other questions specific to the event or you have any feedback, please feel free to send it over to this email address, events@tmagc.com. That's events with an S at the end at tmagc.com. If you have any questions or if you have any feedback, please feel free to send it over to us. So Holly, once again, thank you for joining with us today. This has been a helpful event. Appreciate
Thank
your
you. I
participation.
really enjoyed it. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you. We'll conclude with the dua. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Thank you, Holly. Have a good rest of your day.